The third story. Pietro Boccaccio, fleeing with Agianolilale, Falleth among thieves. The girl escapth through a wood and is led by fortune to a castle. Whlst Pietro is taken by the thieves, but presently escaping from their hands, Wneth after divers adventures, to the castle where his mistress is and espousing her, Return with her to Rome. There was none among all the company, but commended Emilia's story, which the queen seeing to be finished, turned to Alyssa and bade her follow on. Accordingly, studious to obey, she began, There occurreth to my mind, charming ladies, an ill night passed by a pair of indiscreet young lovers. But, for that many happy days ensued thereon, it pleaseth me to tell the story, as one that conformeth to our proposition. There was, a little while agone, at Rome once the head, as it is nowadays the tale of the world-day youth, called Pietro Boccaccio, of a very worshipful family among those of the city, who fell in love with a very fair and lovesome damsel called Agnolella, the daughter of one Gigliuazzo Solo, a plebeian, but very dear to the Romans, and loving her, he contrived so to do that the girl began to love him no less than he loved her. Whereupon, constrained by fervent love, and him seeming he might no longer brook the cruel pain that the desire he had of her gave him, he demanded her in marriage, which no sooner did his kinsfolk know than they all repaired to him and chid him sore for that which he would have done. And on the other hand, they gave Gigliuazzo to understand that he should make no account of Pietro's words, for that, and he did this, they would never have him for friend or kinsman. Pietro, seeing that way barred whereby alone he deemed he might avail to win to his desire, was like to die of chagrin, and had Gigliuazzo consented, he would have taken his daughter to wife, in despite of all his kindred. However, he determined, and it liked the girl, to contrive to give effect to their wishes, and having assured himself, by means of an intermediary, that this was agreeable to her, he agreed with her that she should flee with him from Rome. Footnote 275, Clement V. Early in the 14th century, removed the papal see to Avignon, where it continued to be during the reigns of the 5 succeeding popes, Rome being in the meantime abandoned by the papal court, till Gregory XI, in the year 1376 again, took up his residence at the latter city. It is apparently to this circumstance that Boccaccio alludes in the text. Accordingly, having taken order for this, Pietro arose very early one morning, and taking horse with the damsel, set out for Anagni, where he had certain friends in whom he trusted greatly. They had no leisure to make a wedding of it, for that they feared to be followed, but rode on, devising of their love and now and again kissing one another. It chanced that, when they came mayhap 8 miles from Rome, the way not being overwell known to Pietro, they took a path to the left, whereas they should have kept to the right. And scarce had they ridden more than 2 miles farther when they found themselves near a little castle, wherefrom, as soon as they were seen, there issued suddenly a dozen footmen. The girl, espying these, weenas they were already close upon them, cried out, saying, Pietro, let us be gone, for we are attacked. Then, turning her rounce's head, as best she knew, towards a great wood hard by, she clapped her spurs fast to his flank and held on to the saddle-bow, whereupon the nag, feeling himself goaded, bore her into the wood at a gallop. Pietro, who went gazing more at her face than at the road, not having become so quickly aware as she of the newcomers, was overtaken and seized by them, whilst he still looked, without yet perceiving them, to see whence they should come. They made him alight from his hackney and inquired who he was, which he having told, they proceeded to take counsel together and said, This fellow is of the friends of our enemies. What else should we do but take from him these clothes and this nag, and string him up to one of yonder oaks, to spite the Orsini? They all fell in with this counsel and bade Pietro put off his clothes, which as he was in act to do, foreboding him by this of the ill fate which awaited him, it chanced that an ambush of good 25 footmen started suddenly out upon the others, crying, Kill! Kill! The rogues, taken by surprise, let Pietro be and turned to stand upon their defense, but seeing themselves greatly outnumbered by their assailants, betook themselves to flight, whilst the others pursued them. Pietro, seeing this, hurriedly caught up his gear and springing on his hackney, addressed himself, as best he might, to flee by the way he had seen his mistress take. But finding her not and seeing neither road nor footpath in the wood, neither perceiving any horse's hoof marks, he was the woefulest man alive. And as soon as him seemed he was safe and out of reach of those who had taken him, as well as of the others by whom they had been assailed, he began to drive hither and thither about the wood, weeping and calling. But none answered him, and he dared not turn back and knew not where he might come, and he went forward, more by token that he was in fear of the wild beasts that used to harbor in the woods, at once for himself, and for his mistress, whom he looked momently to see strangled of some bear or some wolf. On this wise, then, did the unlucky Pietro range all day about the wood, crying and calling, whilst going backward, when as he thought to go forward, until, what with shouting and weeping and fear and long fasting, he was so spent that he could no more, and seeing the night come and knowing not what other course to take, he dismounted from his hackney and tied the ladder to a great oak, into which he climbed, so he might not be devoured of the wild beasts in the night. A little after the moon rose, and the night being very clear and bright, he abode there on wake, sighing and weeping and cursing his ill luck, for that he durst not go to sleep, lest he should fall. Albeit, had he had more commodity thereof, grief and the concern in which he was for his mistress would not have suffered him to sleep. Meanwhile, the damsel, fleeing, as we have before said, and knowing not whither to betake herself, save whereas it seemed good to her hackney to carry her, fared on so far into the wood that she could not see where she had entered, and went wandering all day about that desert place, no otherwise than as Pietro had done, now pausing to hearken, and now going on, weeping the while and calling and making moan of her ill hap. At last, seeing that Pietro came not, and it being now eventide, she happened on a little path, into which her hackney turned, and following it, after she had ridden some 2 or more miles, she saw a little house afar off. Thither she made her way as quickly as she might, and found there a good man sore stricken in years and a woman, his wife alike old, who, seeing her alone, said to her, "Daughter, what dost thou alone at this hour in these parts?" The damsel replied, weeping, that she had lost her company in the wood, and inquired how near she was to Anagni. "Daughter mine," answered the good man, "this is not the way to go to Anagni, it is more than 12 miles hence." Quoth the girl, "And how far is it hence to any habitations where I may have a lodging for the night?" To which the good man answered, "There is none anywhere so near that thou mayst come thither by daylight." Then said the damsel, "Since I can go no otherwhere, will it please you harbor me here tonight for the love of God?" "Young lady," replied the old man, "thou art very welcome to abide with us this night. Algates, we must warn you that there are many ill companies, both of friends and of foes, that come and go about these parts both by day and by night, who many a time do us sore annoy and great mischief. And if, by ill chance, thou being here, there come any of them, and seeing thee, fair and young as thou art, should offer to do thee affront and shame, we could not avail to succor thee therefrom. We deem it well to apprise thee of this, so that, and it betide, thou mayst not be able to complain of us." The girl, seeing that it was late, albeit the old man's words affrighted her, said, "And it please God, he will keep both you and me from that annoy. And even if it befall me, it were much less evil to be maltreated of men than to be mangled of the wild beasts in the woods." So saying, she alighted from the rouncy and entered the poor man's house, where she supped with him on such poor fare as they had, and after, all clad as she was, cast herself, together with them, on a little bed of theirs. She gave not over sighing and bewailing her own mishap and that of Pietro all night, knowing not if she might hope other than ill of him. And when it drew near unto morning, she heard a great trampling of folk approaching, whereupon she arose and betaking herself to a great courtyard that lay behind the little house, saw in a corner a great heap of hay, in which she hid herself, so she might not be so quickly found, if those folk should come thither. Hardly had she made an end of hiding herself when these, who were a great company of ill knaves, came to the door of the little house, and causing open to them, entered and found Agnolella's hackney yet all saddled and bridled. Whereupon they asked who was there, and the good man, not seeing the girl, answered, "None is here save ourselves. But this rouncy, from whomsoever it may have escaped, came hither yesterev, and we brought it into the house, lest the wolves should eat it." "Then," said the captain of the troop, "since it hath none other master, it is fair prize for us." Thereupon they all dispersed about the little house, and some went into the courtyard, where, laying down their lances and targets, it chanced that one of them, knowing not what else to do, cast his lance into the hay, and came very near to slay the hidden girl, and she to discover herself. For that the lance passed so close to her left breast that the steel tore a part of her dress, wherefore she was like to utter a great cry, fearing to be wounded. But remembering where she was, she abode still, all fear-stricken. Presently, the rogues, having dressed the kids and other meat they had with them and eaten and drunken, went off, some hither and some thither about their affairs, and carried with them the girl's hackney. When they had gone some distance, the good man asked his wife, "What befell of our young woman, who came thither yesterev? I have seen nothing of her since we arose." The good wife replied that she knew not and went looking for her, whereupon the girl, hearing that the rogues were gone, came forth of the hay, to the no small contentment of her host, who, rejoiced to see that she had not fallen into their hands, said to her, "It now growing day. Now that the day cometh, we will, an it please thee, accompany thee to a castle 5 miles hence, where thou wilt be in safety. But needs must thou go afoot, for yonder ill folk that now departed hence have carried off thy rouncy." The girl concerned herself little about the nag, but besought them for God's sake to bring her to the castle in question, whereupon they set out and came thither about half tierce. Now this castle belonged to one of the Orsini family, by name Lionello di Campidofior, and there by chance was his wife, a very pious and good lady, who, seeing the girl, knew her forthright and received her with joy, and would fain know orderly how she came thither. Agnolella told her all, and the lady, who knew Pietro on like wise, as being a friend of her husband's, was grieved for the ill chance that had betided, and hearing where he had been taken, doubted not but he was dead. Wherefore she said to Agnolella, "Since thou knowest not what is come of Pietro, thou shalt abide here till such time as I shall have a commodity to send thee safe to Rome." Meanwhile Pietro abode, as woebegone as could be, in the oak, and towards the season of the first sleep, he saw a good score of wolves appear, which came all about his hackney, as soon as they saw him. The horse, scenting them, tugged at his bridle till he broke it, and would have fled, but being surrounded and unable to escape, he defended himself a great while with his teeth and his hoofs. At last, however, he was brought down and strangled and quickly disemboweled by the wolves, which took all their fill of his flesh, and having devoured him, made off, without leaving aught but the bones, whereat Pietro, to whom it seemed he had in the rouncy a companion and a support in his troubles, was sore dismayed, and misdoubted he should never avail to win forth of the wood. However, towards daybreak, being perished with cold in the oak and looking still all about him, he caught sight of a great fire before him, mayhap a mile off, wherefore, as soon as it was grown broad day, he came down from the oak, not without fear, and making for the fire, fared on till he came to the place, where he found shepherds eating and making merry about it, by whom he was received for compassion. After he had eaten and warmed himself, he acquainted them with his misadventure, and telling them how he came thither alone, asked them if there was in those parts a village or castle, to which he might betake himself. The shepherds answered that some 3 miles thence there was a castle belonging to Lionello di Campidofior, whose lady was presently there. Whereat Pietro was much rejoiced, and besought them that one of them should accompany him to the castle, which 2 of them readily did. There he found some who knew him, and was in act to inquire for a means of having search made about the forest for the damsel, when he was bidden to the lady's presence, and incontinent repaired to her. Never was joy like unto his, when he saw Agnolella with her, and he was all consumed with desire to embrace her, but forbore of respect for the lady. And if he was glad, the girl's joy was no less great. The gentle lady, having welcomed him and made much of him and heard from him what had betided him, chid him amen of that which he would have done against the will of his kinsfolk. But seeing that he was e'en resolved upon this, and that it was agreeable to the girl also, she said in herself, "Why do I weary myself in vain? These 2 love and know each other, and both are friends of my husband. Their desire is an honorable one, and meseemeth it is pleasing to God, since the one of them hath scaped the gibbet, and the other the lance thrust, and both the wild beasts of the wood, wherefore be it as they will." Then, turning to the lovers, she said to them, "If you have it still at heart to be man and wife, it is my pleasure also. Be it so, and let the nuptials be celebrated here at Lionello's expense. I will engage after to make peace between you and your families." Accordingly, they were married then and there, to the great contentment of Pietro and the yet greater satisfaction of Agnolella, and the gentle lady made them honorable nuptials, in so far as might be in the mountains. There, with the utmost delight, they enjoyed the first fruits of their love, and a few days after, they took horse with the lady and returned, under good escort, to Rome, where she found Pietro's kinsfolk sore incensed at that which he had done, but contrived to make his peace with them, and he lived with his Agnolella in all peace and pleasance to a good old age. The fourth story. Aricisardio, Emanardi, being found by Messer Elizio da Valbona with his daughter, Espoisith her and abidth in peace with her father. Elissa holding her peace and hearkening to the praises bestowed by the ladies her companions upon her story. The queen charged Philostrato tell one of his own, whereupon he began, laughing. I have been so often rated by so many of you ladies for having imposed on you matter for woeful discourse, and such as tended to make you weep, that methinketh I am beholden, and I would in some measure requite you that annoy, to relate somewhat whereby I may make you laugh a little. And I mean therefore to tell you, in a very short story, of a love that, after no worse hindrance than sundry sighs and a brief fright, mingled with shame, came to a happy issue. It is, then, noble ladies, no great while ago since there lived in Romagna a gentleman of great worth and good breeding, called Messer Lizio de Valbona, to whom, well nigh in his old age, it chanced there was born of his wife, Madame Giacomina by name, a daughter, who grew up fair and agreeable beyond any other of the country. And for that she was the only child that remained to her father and mother, they loved and tendered her exceeding dear, and guarded her with marvelous diligence, looking to make some great alliance by her. Now there was a young man of the Manardi of Bretonaro, comely and lusty of his person, by name Rixardo, who much frequented Messer Lizio's house and conversed amin with him, and of whom the latter and his lady took no more account than they would have taken of a son of theirs. Now this Rixardo, looking once and again upon the young lady, and seeing her very fair and sprightly and commendable of manners and fashions, fell desperately in love with her, but was very careful to keep his love secret. The damsel presently became aware thereof, and without anywise seeking to shun the stroke, began on likewise to love him, whereat Rixardo was mightily rejoiced. He had many a time a mind to speak to her, but kept silence of misdoubtance. However, one day taking courage and opportunity, he said to her, I prithee, Caterina, cause me not die of love. To which she straightway made answer, Would God thou wouldst not cause me die. This answer added much courage and pleasure to Rixardo, and he said to her, Never shall aught that may be agreeable to thee miscarry for me, but it resteth with thee to find a means of saving thy life and mine. Rixardo, answered she, thou seest how straitly I am guarded, wherefore, for my part, I cannot see how thou mayst avail to come at me, but if thou canst see aught that I may do without shame to myself, tell it me, and I will do it. Rixardo, having bethought himself of sundry things, answered promptly, My sweet Caterina, I can see no way, except that thou lie or make shift to come upon the gallery that adjoineth thy father's garden, wherein I knew that thou wouldst be annats, I would without fail contrive to come to thee, how high-soever it may be. If thou have the heart to come thither, rejoined Caterina, methinketh I can well enough win to be there. Rixardo assented, and they kissed each other once only in haste, and went their ways. Next day, it being then near the end of May, the girl began to complain before her mother that she had not been able to sleep that night for the excessive heat. Quoth the lady, Of what heat dost thou speak, daughter? Nay, it was nowise hot. Mother mine, answered Caterina, you should say to my seeming, and belike you would say sooth, but you should consider how much hotter are young girls than ladies in years. Daughter mine, rejoined the lady, that is true, but I cannot make it cold and hot at my pleasure, as belike thou wouldst have me do. We must put up with the weather, such as the seasons make it. Maybe this next night will be cooler, and thou wilt sleep better. God grant it may be so, cried Caterina. But it is not usual for the nights to go cooling, as it groweth towards summer. Then what wouldst thou have done? asked the mother. And she answered, An it please my father and you, I would fain have a little bed made in the gallery, that is beside his chamber and over his garden, and there sleep. There I should hear the nightingale sing, and having a cooler place to lie in, I should fare much better than in your chamber. Quoth the mother, Daughter, comfort thyself, I will tell thy father, and as he will, so will we do. Messer Lizio, hearing all this from his wife, said, For that he was an old man, and may be therefore somewhat cross-grained, What nightingale is this to whose song she would sleep? I will yet make her sleep to the chirp of the crickets. Caterina, coming to know this, more of despite than for the heat, not only slept not that night, but suffered not her mother to sleep, still complaining of the great heat. Accordingly, next morning, the latter repaired to her husband and said to him, "Sir, you have little tenderness for yonder girl. What mattereth it to you if she lie in the gallery? She could get no rest all night for the heat. Besides, can you wonder at her having a mind to hear the nightingale sing, seeing she is but a child? Young folk are curious of things like themselves." Messer Lizio, hearing this, said, "Go to, make her a bed there, such as you think fit, and bind it about with some curtain or other, and there let her lie and hear the nightingale sing to her heart's content." The girl, learning this, straightway let make a bed in the gallery, and meaning to lie there that same night, watched till she saw Rixaerdo, and made him a signal appointed between them, by which he understood what was to be done. Messer Lizio, hearing the girl gone to bed, locked a door that led from his chamber into the gallery, and betook himself likewise to sleep. As for Rixaerdo, as soon as he heard all quiet on every hand, he mounted a wall with the aid of a ladder, and thence, laying hold of certain toothings of another wall, he made his way, with great toil and danger, if he had fallen, up to the gallery, where he was quietly received by the girl with the utmost joy. Then, after many kisses, they went to bed together and took delight and pleasure one of another well nigh all that night, making the nightingale sing many a time. The nights being short, and the delight great, and it being now, though they thought it not near day, they fell asleep without any covering, so overheated were they what with the weather and what with their sport, Caterina having her right arm entwined about Rixaerdo's neck, and holding him with the left hand by that thing which you ladies think most shame to name among men. As they slept on this wise, without awaking, the day came on, and Messer Lizio arose, and remembering him that his daughter lay in the gallery, opened the door softly, saying in himself, "Let us see how the nightingale hath made Caterina sleep this night." Then going in, he softly lifted up the serge, wherewith the bed was curtained about, and saw his daughter and Rixaerdo lying asleep, naked and uncovered, embraced as it hath before been set out. Whereupon, having recognized Rixaerdo, he went out again, and repairing to his wife's chamber, called to her, saying, "Quick, wife, get thee up and come see, for that thy daughter hath been so curious of the nightingale that she hath e'en taken it and hath it in hand." "How can that be?" quoth she, and he answered, "Thou shalt see it, and thou come quickly." Accordingly, she made haste to dress herself and quietly followed her husband to the bed, where, the curtain being drawn, Madame Giacomina might plainly see how her daughter had taken and held the nightingale, which she had so longed to hear sing. Whereat the lady, holding herself sore deceived of Rixaerdo, would have cried out and railed at him. But Messer Lizio said to her, "Wife, as thou holdest my love dear, look thou say not a word, for verily since she hath gotten it, it shall be hers. Rixaerdo is young and rich and gently born. He cannot make us other than a good son-in-law. And he would part from me on good terms, needs must he first marry her. So it will be found that he hath put the nightingale in his own cage, and not in that of another." The lady was comforted to see that her husband was not angered at the matter, and considering that her daughter had passed a good night and rested well, and had caught the nightingale, to boot, she held her tongue. Nor had they abidden long after these words when Rixaerdo awoke, and seeing that it was broad day, gave himself over for lost and called Caterina, saying, "Alack, my soul, how shall we do, for the day is come and hath caught me here." Whereupon Messer Lizio came forward and lifting the curtain, answered, "We shall do well." When Rixaerdo saw him seemed the heart was torn out of his body, and sitting up in bed, he said, "My lord, I crave your pardon for God's sake. Acknowledge to have deserved death as a disloyal and wicked man, wherefore do you with me as best pleaseth you. But I prithee, and it may be, have mercy on my life and let me not die." "Rixaerdo," answered Messer Lizio, "the love that I bore thee and the faith I had in thee merited not this return. Yet, since thus it is, and youth hath carried thee away into such a fault, do thou, to save thyself from death and me from shame, take Caterina to thy lawful wife, so that, like as this night she hath been thine, she may e'en be then so long as she shall live. On this wise thou mayst gain my pardon and thine own safety. But, an thou choose not to do this, commend thy soul to God." Whilst these words were saying, Caterina let go the nightingale, and covering herself, fell to weeping sore and beseeching her father to pardon Rixaerdo, whilst on the other hand she entreated her lover to do as Messer Lizio wished, so they might long pass such nights together in security. But there needed not over many prayers, for that, On the one hand, shame of the fault committed and desire to make amends for it, and on the other, the fear of death and the wish to escape, to say nothing of his ardent love and longing to possess the thing beloved made Rixaerdo freely, and without hesitation avouch himself ready to do that which pleased Messer Lizio. Whereupon the latter borrowed of Madame Jacomina one of her rings, and there, without budging, Rixaerdo in their presence took Caterina to his wife. This done, Messer Lizio and his lady departed, saying, "Now rest yourselves, for belike you have more need thereof than of rising." They being gone, the young folk clipped each other anew, and not having run more than 6 courses overnight, they ran other twain ere they arose, and so made an end of the first day's tilting. Then they arose, and Rixaerdo, having had more orderly conference with Messer Lizio, a few days after, as it beseemed, he married the damsel over again, in the presence of their friends and kinsfolk, and brought her with great pomp to his own house. There he held goodly and honorable nuptials, and after went long nightingale fowling with her to his heart's content, in peace and solace, both by night and by day. The fifth story. Giudiotitio da Cremona Eliavth, to Giasuamino da Pavia, a daughter of his and Dith. Giannoeli 501, Sevierano, and Minghiano 501, mingle fall in love with the girl Atfanza, and come to blows on her account. Ultimately, She is proved to be Janol's sister, and is given to Minghiano to wife. All the ladies, hearkening to the story of the nightingale, had laughed so much that, though Philostrato had made an end of telling, they could not yet give over laughing. But after they had laughed a while, the queen said to Philostrato, "Assuredly, if thou afflictedst us ladies yesterday, thou hast so tickled us today that none of us can deservedly complain of thee." Then, addressing herself to Nephil, she charged her tell, and she blithely began to speak thus. "Since Philostrato, discoursing, hath entered into Romagna, it pleaseth me on like wise to go ranging a while therein with mine own story. I say, then, that there dwelt once in the city of Fano 2 Lombards, whereof the one was called Guidato de Cremona, and the other Giacomino da Pavia, both men advanced in years, who had in their youth been well nigh always soldiers, and engaged in deeds of arms. Guidato, being at the point of death, and having nor son nor other kinsman nor friend in whom he trusted more than in Giacomino, left him a little daughter he had, of maybe 10 years of age, and all that he possessed in the world, and after having bespoken him at length of his affairs, he died. In those days it befell that the city of Finza, which had been long in war and ill case, was restored to somewhat better estate, and permission to sojourn there was freely conceded to all who had a mind to return thither. Wherefore Giacomino, who had abated there otherwhile and had a liking for the place, returned thither with all his good, and carried with him the girl left him by Guidato, whom he loved and entreated as his own child. The latter grew up and became as fair a damsel as any in the city, aye, and as virtuous and well-bred as she was fair. Wherefore she began to be courted of many, but especially 2 very agreeable young men of equal worth and condition vowed her a very great love, insomuch that for jealousy they came to hold each other in hate out of measure. They were called, the one Janol di Severino and the other Minghino di Mingle, nor was there either of them but would gladly have taken the young lady, who was now 15 years old, to wife, had it been suffered of his kinsfolk. Wherefore, seeing her denied to them on honorable wise, each cast about to get her for himself as best he might. Now Giacomino had in his house an old serving wench and a serving man, Crivello by name, a very merry and obliging person, with whom Janol clapped up a great acquaintance, and to whom, ween as him seemed time, he discovered his passion, praying him to be favorable to him in his endeavor to obtain his desire, and promising him great things, and he did this. Whereto quoth Crivello, "Look you, I can do naught for thee in this matter other than that, when next Giacomino goeth abroad to supper, I will bring thee whereas she may be. For that, and I offered to say a word to her in thy favor, she would never stop to listen to me. If this like thee, I promise it to thee and will do it, and do thou after, and thou know how, that which thou deemest shall best serve thy purpose." Janol answered that he desired nothing more, and they abode on this understanding. Meanwhile Minghino, on his part, had suborned the maidservant, and so wrought with her that she had several times carried messages to the girl, and had well nigh inflamed her with love of him. besides which she had promised him to bring him in company with her, so soon as Giacomino should chance to go abroad of an evening for whatever cause. Not long after this, it chanced that, by Crivello's contrivance, Giacomino went to sup with a friend of his, whereupon Crivello gave Janol to know thereof and appointed with him that, whenas he made a certain signal, he should come and would find the door open. The maid, on her side, knowing nothing of all this, let Minghino know that Giacomino was to sup abroad and bade him abide near the house, so that, whenas he saw a signal which she should make he might come and enter therein. The evening come, the two lovers, knowing nothing of each other's designs, but each misdoubting of his rival, came, with sundry companions armed, to enter into possession. Minghino, with his troop took up his quarters in the house of a friend of his, a neighbor of the young ladies, whilst Janol and his friends stationed themselves at a little distance from the house. Meanwhile, Crivello and the maid, Giacomino being gone, studied each to send the other away. Quoth he to her, "Why dost thou not get thee to bed? Why goest thou still wandering about the house? And thou," retorted she, "why goest thou not for thy master? What awaitest thou here, now that thou hast supped?" And so neither could make other avoid the place, but Crivello, seeing the hour come that he had appointed with Janol, said in himself, "What reck I of her? And she abide not quiet, she is like to smart for it." Accordingly, giving the appointed signal, he went to open the door, whereupon Janol, coming up in haste with two companions, entered and finding the young lady in the saloon, laid hands on her to carry her off. The girl began to struggle and make a great outcry, as likewise did the maid, which Minghino hearing, he ran thither with his companions, and seeing the young lady being presently dragged out at the door, they pulled out their swords and cried all, "Ho, traitors! Ye are dead men. The thing shall not go thus. What is this violence?" So saying, they fell to hewing at them, whilst the neighbors, issuing forth at the clamor with lights and arms, began to blame Janol's behavior and to second Minghino. Wherefore, after long contention, the latter rescued the young lady from his rival and restored her to Giacomino's house. But before the fray was over, up came the town captain's officers and arrested many of them. And amongst the rest, Minghino and Janol and Crivello were taken and carried off to prison. After matters were grown quiet again, Giacomino returned home and was sore chagrined at that which had happened. But, inquiring how it had come about, and finding that the girl was nowise at fault, he was somewhat appeased and determined in himself to marry her as quickly as he might, so the like should not again betide. Next morning, the kinsfolk of the two young men, hearing the truth of the case and knowing the ill that might ensue thereof for the imprisoned youths, should Giacomino choose to do that which he reasonably might, repaired to him and prayed him with soft words to have regard, not so much to the affront which he had suffered from the little sense of the young men, as to the love and good will which they believed he bore to themselves who thus besought him. Submitting themselves, and the young men who had done the mischief to any amends it should please him take. Giacomino, who had in his time seen many things and was a man of sense, answered briefly, "Gentlemen, were I in mine own country, as I am in yours, I hold myself so much your friend that neither in this nor in other what would I do aught save insomuch as it should please you. Besides, I am the more bounden to comply with your wishes in this matter, inasmuch as you have therein offended against yourselves, for that the girl in question is not, as belike many suppose, of Cremona nor of Pavia. Nay, she is a Fintine, albeit neither I nor she nor he of whom I had her might ever learn whose daughter she was. Wherefore, concerning that whereof you pray me, so much shall be done by me as you yourselves shall enjoin me." The gentleman, hearing this, marveled and returning thanks to Giacomino for his gracious answer, prayed him that it would please him tell them how she came to his hands, and how he knew her to be a Fintine. Whereto quoth he, "Guidato de Cremona, who was my friend and comrade, told me on his deathbed, that when this city was taken by the Emperor Frederick and everything given up to pillage, he entered with his companions into a house and found it full of booty, but deserted by its inhabitants, save only this girl, who was then some 2 years old or thereabouts, and who, seeing him mount the stairs, called him father. Whereupon, taking compassion upon her, he carried her off with him to Fano, together with all that was in the house, and dying there, left her to me with what he had, charging me marry her in due time and give her to her dowry that which had been hers. Since she hath come to marriageable age, I have not yet found an occasion of marrying her to my liking, though I would gladly do it rather than that another mischance like that of yesternight should betide me on her account. Now among the others there was a certain Giglielmino de Medicina, who had been with Guidato in that affair, and knew very well whose house it was that he had plundered, and he, seeing the person in question there among the rest, accosted him, saying, Bernabuccio, hearest thou what Giacomino saith? Aye do I, answered Bernabuccio, and I was presently in thought thereof, more by token that I mind me to have lost a little daughter of the age whereof Giacomino speaketh in those very troubles. Quoth Giglielmino, this is she for certain, for that I was once in company with Guidato, when I heard him tell where he had done the plundering, and knew it to be thy house that he had sacked. Wherefore do thou bethink thee if thou mayst credibly recognize her by any token, and let make search therefore, for thou wilt assuredly find that she is thy daughter. Accordingly, Bernabuccio bethought himself, and remembered that she should have a little cross-shaped scar over her left ear, proceeding from a tumor, which he had caused cut for her no great while before that occurrence. Whereupon, without further delay, he accosted Giacomino, who was still there, and besought him to carry him to his house and let him see the damsel. To this he readily consented, and carrying him thither, let bring the girl before him. When Bernabuccio set eyes on her, him seemed he saw the very face of her mother, who was yet a handsome lady. Nevertheless, not contenting himself with this, he told Giacomino that he would fain of his favor have leave to raise her hair a little above her left ear, to which the other consented. Accordingly, going up to the girl, who stood shamefast, he lifted up her hair with his right hand and found the cross. Whereupon, knowing her to be indeed his daughter, he fell to weeping tenderly and embracing her, notwithstanding her resistance. Then, turning to Giacomino, brother mine, quoth he, this is my daughter. It was my house Guidato plundered, and this girl was, in the sudden alarm, forgotten there of my wife and her mother. And until now we believed that she had perished with the house, which was burned me that same day. The girl, hearing this, and seeing him to be a man in years, gave credence to his words, and submitting herself to his embraces, as moved by some occult instinct, fell a-weeping tenderly with him. Bernabuccio presently sent for her mother and other her kinswomen, and for her sisters and brothers, and presented her to them all, recounting the matter to them. Then, after 1,000 embraces, he carried her home to his house with the utmost rejoicing, to the great satisfaction of Giacomino. The town captain, who was a man of worth, learning this and knowing that Janol, whom he had in prison, was Bernabuccio's son and therefore the lady's own brother, determined indulgently to overpass the offense committed by him, and released with him Minghino and Crivello and the others who were implicated in the affair. Moreover, he interceded with Bernabuccio and Giacomino concerning these matters and making peace between the two young men, gave the girl, whose name was Agnesa, to Minghino to wife, to the great contentment of all their kinsfolk. Whereupon Minghino, mightily rejoiced, made a great and goodly wedding, and carrying her home, lived with her many years after in peace and weal. The sixth story. Giannani 501 Procida being found with a young lady, whom he loved and who had been given to King Frederick of Sicily, is bound with her to a stake to be burnt. But, being recognized by Rugiidel, Oria, Escapth and Becometh her husband. Nifal's story, which had much pleased the ladies, being ended, the queen bade Pampinea address herself to tell another, and she accordingly, raising her bright face, began. Exceeding great, charming ladies, is the might of love, and exposeth lovers to sore travails, aye, and to excessive and unforeseen perils, as may be gathered from many a thing that hath been related both today and otherwhiles. Nevertheless, it pleaseth me yet again to demonstrate it to you with a story of an enamored youth. Ischia is an island very near Naples, and therein, among others, was once a very fair and sprightly damsel, by name Restituta, who was the daughter of a gentleman of the island called Marino Bulgaro, and whom a youth named Gianni, a native of a little island near Ischia, called Procida, loved more than his life, as she on like wise loved him. Not only did he come by day from Procida to see her, but oftentimes annats, not finding a boat, he had swum from Procida to Ischia, at the least to look upon the walls of her house, and he might know otherwise. During the continuance of this so ardent love, it befell that the girl, being all alone one summer day on the seashore, chanced, as she went from rock to rock, loosening shellfish from the stones with a knife. Upon a place hidden among the cliffs, where, at once for shade and for the commodity of a spring of very cool water that was there, certain young men of Sicily, coming from Naples, had taken up their quarters with a pinnace they had. They, seeing that she was alone and very handsome, and was yet unaware of them, took counsel together to seize her and carry her off and put their resolve into execution. Accordingly, they took her, for all she made a great outcry, and carrying her aboard the pinnace, made the best of their way to Calabria, where they fell to disputing of whose she should be. Brief, each would fain have her. Wherefore, being unable to agree among themselves and fearing to come to worse and to mar their affairs for her, they took counsel together to present her to Frederick, King of Sicily, who was then a young man and delighted in such toys. Accordingly, coming to Palermo, they made gift of the damsel to the king, who, seeing her to be fair, held her dear. But for that he was presently somewhat infirm of his person, he commanded that, against he should be stronger, she should be lodged in a very goodly pavilion, belonging to a garden of his he called La Cuba, and there tended. And so it was done. Great was the outcry in Ischia for the ravishment of the damsel, and what most chagrined them was that they could not learn who they were that had carried her off. But Giovanni, whom the thing concerned more than any other, not looking to get any news of this in Ischia, and learning in what direction the ravishers had gone, equipped another pinnace and embarking therein, as quickliest as he might, scoured all the coast from La Minerva to La Scala in Calabria, inquiring everywhere for news of the girl. Being told at La Scala that she had been carried off to Palermo by some Sicilian sailors, he betook himself thither as quickly as he might, and there, after much search, finding that she had been presented to the king and was by him kept under ward at La Cuba, he was sore chagrined and lost well nigh all hope, not only of ever having her again, but even of seeing her. Nevertheless, detained by love, having sent away his pinnace, and seeing that he was known of none there, he abode behind, and passing often by La Cuba, he chanced one day to catch sight of her at a window, and she saw him, to the great contentment of them both. Giovanni, seeing the place lonely, approached as most he might, and bespeaking her, was instructed by her how he must do, and he would thereafterward have further speech of her. He then took leave of her, having first particularly examined the ordnance of the place in every part, and waited till a good part of the night was past, when he returned thither, and clambering up in places where a woodpecker had scarce found a foothold, he made his way into the garden. There he found a long pole, and setting it against the window which his mistress had shown him, climbed up thereby lightly enough. The damsel, her seeming she had already lost her honor, for the preservation whereof she had in times past been somewhat coy to him, thinking that she could give herself to none more worthily than to him, and doubting not to be able to induce him to carry her off, had resolved in herself to comply with him in every his desire. Wherefore she had left the window open, so he might enter forthright. Accordingly, Giovanni, finding it open, softly made his way into the chamber and laid himself beside the girl, who slept not, and who, before they came to other what, discovered to him all her intent, instantly beseeching him to take her thence and carry her away. Giovanni answered that nothing could be so pleasing to him as this, and promised that he would without fail, as soon as he should have taken his leave of her, put the matter in train on such wise that he might carry her away with him, the first time he returned thither. Then, embracing each other with exceeding pleasure, they took that delight beyond which love can afford no greater, and after reiterating it again and again, they fell asleep, without perceiving it, in each other's arms. Meanwhile, the king, who had at first sight been greatly taken with the damsel, calling her to mind and feeling himself well of body, determined, albeit it was nigh upon day, to go and abide with her a while. Accordingly, he betook himself privily to La Cuba with certain of his servants, and entering the pavilion, caused softly open the chamber, wherein he knew the girl slept. Then, with a great lighted flambeau before him, he entered therein, and looking upon the bed, saw her and Giovanni lying asleep and naked in each other's arms. Whereas he was of a sudden furiously incensed, and flamed up into such a passion of wrath that it lacked of little but he had, without saying a word, slain them both then and there with a dagger he had by his side. However, esteeming it a very base thing of any man, much more a king, to slay two naked folk in their sleep, he contained himself and determined to put them to death in public and by fire. Wherefore, turning to one only companion he had with him, he said to him, "How deemest thou of this vile woman, on whom I had set my hope?" And after he asked him if he knew the young man who had dared enter his house to do him such an affront and such an outrage. But he answered that he remembered not ever to have seen him. The king then departed the chamber, full of rage, and commanded that the two lovers should be taken and bound, naked as they were, and that, as soon as it was broad day, they should be carried to Palermo and there bound to a stake, back to back in the public place, where they should be kept till the hour of tierce, so they might be seen of all, and after burnt, even as they had deserved. And this said, he returned to his palace at Palermo, exceeding wroth. The king gone, there fell many upon the two lovers, and not only awakened them, but forthright without any pity took them and bound them. Which when they saw, it may lightly be conceived if they were woeful and feared for their lives, and wept and made moan. According to the king's commandment, they were carried to Palermo and bound to a stake in the public place, whilst the faggots and the fire were made ready before their eyes, to burn them at the hour appointed. Thither straightway flocked all the townsfolk, both men and women, to see the two lovers. The men all pressed to look upon the damsel, and like as they praised her for fair and well made in every part of her body. Even so, on the other hand, the women, who all ran to gaze upon the young man, supremely commended him for handsome and well-shapen. But the wretched lovers, both sore ashamed, stood with bowed heads and bewailed their sorry fortune, hourly expecting the cruel death by fire. Whilst they were thus kept against the appointed hour, the default of them committed, being bruited about everywhere, came to the ears of Ruggieri del Oria, a man of inestimable worth, and then the king's admiral, whereupon he repaired to the place where they were bound, and considering first the girl, commended her for beauty, then, turning to look upon the young man, knew him without much difficulty, and drawing nearer to him, asked him if he were not Giovanni di Procida. The youth, raising his eyes and recognizing the admiral, answered, "My lord, I was indeed he of whom you ask, but I am about to be no more." The admiral then asked him what had brought him to that pass, and he answered, "Love and the king's anger." The admiral caused him tell his story more at large, and having heard everything from him as it had happened, was about to depart, when Giovanni called him back and said to him, "For God's sake, my lord, and it may be, get me one favor of him who maketh me to abide thus." "What is that?" asked Ruggieri, and Giovanni said, "I see I must die, and that speedily, and I ask therefore, by way of favor, as I am bound with my back to this damsel, whom I have loved more than my life, even as she hath loved me, and she with her back to me, that we may be turned about with our faces one to the other, so that dying I may look upon her face and get me gone, comforted." "With all my heart," answered Ruggieri, laughing, "I will do on such wise that thou shalt yet see her, till thou grow weary of her sight." Then, taking leave of him, he charged those who were appointed to carry the sentence into execution that they should proceed no farther therein, without other commandment of the king, and straightway betook himself to the latter, to whom, albeit he saw him sore incensed, he spared not to speak his mind, saying, "King, in what have the two young folk offended against thee, whom thou hast commanded to be burned yonder in the public place?" The king told him, and Ruggieri went on, "The offense committed by them deserveth it indeed, but not from thee. For, like as defaults merit punishment, even so do good offices merit recompense, let alone grace and clemency. Knowest thou who these are thou wouldst have burnt?" The king answered no, and Ruggieri continued, "Then I will have thee know them, so thou mayst see how discreetly thou sufferest thyself to be carried away by the transports of passion. The young man is the son of Landolfo di Procida, own brother to Messer Gian di Procida, by whose means thou art king and lord of this island, and the damsel is the daughter of Marino Bulgaro, to whose influence thou owest it that thine officers have not been driven forth of Ischia. Moreover, they are lovers who have long loved one another, and constrained of love, rather than of will to do despite to thine authority, have done this sin, if that can be called sin which young folk do for love. Wherefore, then, wilt thou put them to death, weenas thou shouldst rather honor them with the greatest favors and boons at thy commandment." Footnote 281. Giovanni di Procida was a Sicilian noble, to whose efforts in stirring up the island to revolt against Charles of Anjou was mainly due the popular rising known as the Sicilian Vespers, A. 500. 1283, which expelled the French usurper from Sicily and transferred the crown to the house of Aragon. The Frederick A. 500, 1296–1337, named in the text, was the fourth prince of the latter dynasty. The king, hearing this and certifying himself that Ruggieri spoke sooth, not only forbore from proceeding to do worse, but repented him of that which he had done. Wherefore he commanded incontinent that the two lovers should be loosed from the stake and brought before him, which was forthright done. Therewith, having fully acquainted himself with their case, he concluded that it behoved him requite them the injury he had done them with gifts and honor. Wherefore he let clothe them anew on sumptuous wise, and finding them of one accord, caused Giovanni to take the damsel to wife. Then, making them magnificent presents, he sent them back, rejoicing, to their own country, where they were received with the utmost joyance and delight. The seventh story. Teodoro, being Enamored of Violantii, daughter of Messer Amerigo his lord, gtth her with child and is condemned to be hangd. But, being recognized and delivered by his father, as they are leading him to the gallows, scourging him the while, he taketh Violantii to wife. The ladies, who abode all fearful in suspense to know if the lovers should be burnt, hearing of their escape, praised God and were glad, whereupon the queen, seeing that Pampinea had made an end of her story, imposed on Loretta the charge of following on, who blithely proceeded to say, Fairest ladies, in the days when good King William ruled over Sicily, there was in that island a gentleman hight Messer Amerigo Abate of Trapani, who, among other worldly goods, was very well furnished with children. Wherefore, having occasion for servants, and there coming thither from the Levant certain galleys of Genos corsairs, who had in their cruises off the coast of Armenia taken many boys, he bought some of these latter, deeming them Turks, and amongst them one, Teodoro by name, of nobler mien and better bearing than the rest, who seemed all mere shepherds. Teodoro, although entreated as a slave, was brought up in the house with Messer Amerigo's children, and conforming more to his own nature than to the accidents of fortune, approved himself so accomplished and well-bred, and so commended himself to Messer Amerigo that he set him free, and still believing him to be a Turk, caused baptize him and call him Pietro, and made him chief over all his affairs, trusting greatly in him. Footnote 282, William II. A. 500. 1166–1189, the last legitimate king of the Norman dynasty in Sicily, called the Good, to distinguish him from his father, William the Bad. As Messer Amerigo's children grew up, there grew up with them a daughter of his, called Violante, a fair and dainty damsel, who, her father tarrying overmuch to marry her, became by chance enamored of Pietro, and loving him, and holding his manners and fashions in great esteem, was yet ashamed to discover this to him. But love spared her that pains, for that Pietro, having once and again looked upon her by stealth, had become so passionately enamored of her that he never knew ease save whenas he saw her. But he was sore afraid lest any should become aware thereof, him seeming that in this he did other than well. The young lady, who took pleasure in looking upon him, soon perceived this, and to give him more assurance, showed herself exceeding well pleased therewith, as indeed she was. On this wise they abode a great while, daring not to say aught to one another, much as each desired it. But whilst both, alike enamored, languished and kindled in the flames of love, fortune, as if it had determined of will aforethought that this should be, furnished them with an occasion of doing away the timorousness that balked them. Messer Amerigo had, about a mile from Trapani, a very goodly place, to which his lady was wont ofttimes to resort by way of pastime with her daughter and other women and ladies. Thither accordingly they betook themselves one day of great heat, carrying Pietro with them, and their abiding it befell, as whiles we see it happen in summer time, that the sky became of a sudden overcast with dark clouds, wherefore the lady set out with her company to return to Trapani, so they might not be there overtaken of the foul weather, and fared on as fast as they might. But Pietro and Violante, being young, twent her mother and the rest by a great way urged belike, no less by love than by fear of the weather, and they being already so far in advance that they were hardly to be seen. It chanced that, of a sudden, after many thunderclaps, a very heavy and thick shower of hail began to fall, wherefrom the lady and her company fled into the house of a husbandman. Footnote 283. apparently a pleasure garden, without a house attached in which they might have taken shelter from the rain. Pietro and the young lady, having no readier shelter, took refuge in a little old hut, well nigh all in ruins, wherein none dwelt, and there huddled together under a small piece of roof, that yet remained whole. The scantness of the cover constrained them to press close one to other, and this touching was the means of somewhat emboldening their minds to discover the amorous desires that consumed them both. And Pietro first began to say, "Would God this hail might never give over, so but I might abide as I am." "Indeed," answered the girl, "that were dear to me also." From these words they came to taking each other by the hands and pressing them, and from that to clipping and after to kissing, it hailing still the while. And in short, not to recount every particular, the weather mended not before they had known the utmost delights of love, and had taken order to have their pleasure secretly one of the other. The storm ended, they fared on to the gate of the city, which was near at hand, and there awaiting the lady, returned home with her. Thereafter, with very discreet and secret ordinance, they foregathered again and again in the same place, to the great contentment of them both, and the work went on so briskly that the young lady became with child, which was sore unwelcome both to the one and the other. Wherefore she used many arts to rid herself, contrary to the course of nature, of her burden, but could nowise avail to accomplish it. Therewithal, Pietro, fearing for his life, bethought himself to flee and told her, to which she answered, "An thou depart, I will without fail kill myself." Whereupon quoth Pietro, who loved her exceedingly, "Lady mine, how wilt thou have me abide here? Thy pregnancy will discover our default, and it will lightly be pardoned unto thee, but I, poor wretch, it will be must needs bear the penalty of thy sin and mine own." "Pietro," replied she, "my sin must indeed be discovered, but be assured that thine will never be known, and thou tell not thyself." Then said he, "Since thou promisest me this, I will remain, but look thou keep thy promise to me." After a while, the young lady, who had as most she might, concealed her being with child, seeing that, for the waxing of her body, she might no longer dissemble it, one day discovered her case to her mother, beseeching her with many tears to save her. Whereupon the lady, beyond measure woeful, gave her hard words galore, and would know of her how the thing had come about. Violante, in order that no harm might come to Pietro, told her a story of her own devising, disguising the truth in other forms. The lady believed it, and to conceal her daughter's default, sent her away to a country house of theirs. There, the time of her delivery coming and the girl crying out, as women used to do, what while her mother never dreamed that Messer Amerigo, who was well nigh never wont to do so, should come thither. It chanced that he passed, on his return from hawking, by the chamber where his daughter lay, and marveling at the outcry she made, suddenly entered the chamber and demanded what was to do. The lady, seeing her husband come unawares, started up all woebegone and told him that which had befallen the girl. But he, less easy of belief than his wife had been, declared that it could not be true that she knew not by whom she was with child and would altogether know who he was, adding that, by confessing it, she might regain his favor, else must she make ready to die without mercy. The lady did her utmost to persuade her husband to abide content with that which she had said, but to no purpose. He flew out into a passion and running, with his naked sword in his hand, at his daughter, who, what while her mother held her father in parley, had given birth to a male child, said, "Either do thou discover by whom the child was begotten, or thou shalt die without delay." The girl, fearing death, broke her promise to Pietro and discovered all that had passed between him and her, which when the gentleman heard, he fell into a fury of anger and hardly withheld himself from slaying her. However, after he had said to her that which his rage dictated to him, he took horse again and returning to Trapani, recounted the affront that Pietro had done him to a certain Messer Corrado, who was captain there for the king. The latter caused forthright seize Pietro, who was off his guard, and put him to the torture, whereupon he confessed all, and being a few days after sentenced by the captain to be flogged through the city, and after strung up by the neck Messer Amerigo, whose wrath had not been done away by the having brought Pietro to death, in order that one and the same hour should rid the earth of the two lovers and their child, put poison in a hanap with wine, and delivering it, together with a naked poniard. To a serving man of his said to him, "Carry these two things to Violante and bid her, on my part, forthright take which she will of these two deaths, poison or steel. else will I have her burned alive, even as she hath deserved, in the presence of as many townsfolk as be here. This done, thou shalt take the child, a few days agone born of her, and dash its head against the wall, and after cast it to the dogs to eat. This barbarous sentence passed by the cruel father upon his daughter and his grandchild. The servant, who was more disposed to ill than to good, went off upon his errand. Meanwhile, Pietro, as he was carried to the gallows by the officers, being scourged of them the while, passed, according as it pleased those who led the company, before a hostelry wherein were 3 noblemen of Armenia, who had been sent by the king of that country ambassadors to Rome, to treat with the Pope of certain matters of great moment, concerning a crusade that was about to be undertaken, and who had lighted down there to take some days' rest and refreshment. They had been much honored by the noblemen of Trapani, and especially by Messer Amerigo, and hearing those pass who led Pietro, they came to a window to see. Now Pietro was all naked to the waist, with his hands bounden behind his back, and one of the 3 ambassadors, a man of great age and authority, named Phinio, espied on his breast a great vermeil spot, not painted, but naturally imprinted on his skin, after the fashion of what women here call roses. Seeing this, there suddenly recurred to his memory a son of his who had been carried off by corsairs 15 years agone upon the coast of Lazistan, and of whom he had never since been able to learn any news. And considering the age of the poor wretch who was scourged, he bethought himself that, if his son were alive, he must be of such an age as Pietro appeared to him. Wherefore he began to suspect by that token that it must be he, and bethought himself that, were he indeed his son, he should still remember him of his name, and that of his father, and of the Armenian tongue. Accordingly, as he drew near, he called out, saying, Ho, Teodoro! Pietro, hearing this, straightway lifted up his head, and Phinio, speaking in Armenian, said to him, What countryman art thou, and whose son? The sergeants who had him in charge halted with him, of respect for the nobleman, so that Pietro answered, saying, I was of Armenia, and son to one Phinio, and was brought hither, as a little child, by I know not what folk. Phinio, hearing this, knew him for certain to be the son whom he had lost, wherefore he came down, weeping with his companions, and ran to embrace him among all the sergeants. Then, casting over his shoulders a mantle of the richest silk, which he had on his own back, he besought the officer who was escorting him to execution to be pleased to wait there till such time as commandment should come to him to carry the prisoner back. To which he answered that he would well. Now Phinio had already learned the reason for which Pietro was being led to death, report having noised it abroad everywhere. Wherefore he straightway betook himself, with his companions and their retinue, to Messer Corrado, and bespoke him thus. Sir, he whom you have doomed to die as a slave is a free man and my son, and is ready to take to wife her, whom it is said he hath bereft of her maidenhead. Wherefore may it please you to defer the execution, till such time as it may be learned if she will have him to husband. So, in case she be willing, you may not be found to have done contrary to the law. Messer Corrado, hearing that the condemned man was Phinio's son, marveled, and confessing that which the latter said to be true, was somewhat ashamed of the unright of fortune, and straightway caused carry Pietro home. Then, sending for Messer Amerigo, he acquainted him with these things. Messer Amerigo, who by this believed his daughter and grandson to be dead, was the wofullest man in the world for that which he had done, seeing that all might very well have been set right, so but Violante were yet alive. Nevertheless, he dispatched a runner whereas his daughter was, to the intent that, in case his commandment had not been done, it should not be carried into effect. The messenger found the servant sent by Messer Amerigo raiding the lady, before whom he had laid the poniard and the poison, for that she made not her election as speedily, and would have constrained her to take the one or the other. But hearing his lord's commandment, he let her be, and returning to Messer Amerigo, told him how the case stood, to the great satisfaction of the latter, who, betaking himself whereas Phinio was, excused himself, well nigh with tears, as best he knew, of that which had passed, craving pardon therefore, and avouching that, and Teodoro would have his daughter to wife, he was exceeding well pleased to give her to him. Phinio gladly received his excuses, and answered, It is my intent that my son shall take your daughter to wife, and if he will not, let the sentence passed upon him take its course. Accordingly, being thus agreed, they both repaired whereas Teodoro abode, yet all fearful of death, albeit he was rejoiced to have found his father again, and questioned him of his mind concerning this thing. When he heard that, and he would, he might have Violante to wife, such was his joy that him seemed he had won from hell to heaven at one bound, and he answered that this would be to him the utmost of favors, so but it pleased both of them. Thereupon they sent to know the mind of the young lady, who, whereas she abode in expectation of death, the wofullest woman alive, hearing that which had betided and was like to betide Teodoro, after much parley, began to lend some faith to their words, and taking a little comfort, answered that, were she to ensue her own wishes in the matter, no greater happiness could betide her than to be the wife of Teodoro. Algates, she would do that which her father should command her. Accordingly, all parties being of accord, the two lovers were married with the utmost magnificence, to the exceeding satisfaction of all the townsfolk. And the young lady, heartening herself and letting rear her little son, became ere long fairer than ever. Then, being risen from childbed, she went out to meet Pheinio, whose return was expected from Rome, and paid him reverence as to a father. Whereupon he, exceeding well pleased to have so fair a daughter-in-law, caused celebrate their nuptials with the utmost pomp, and rejoicing and receiving her as a daughter, ever after held her such. And after some days, taking ship with his son and her and his little grandson, he carried them with him into Lazistan, where the two lovers abode in peace and happiness, so long as life endured unto them. The eighth story. Nastgiodglionisti, falling in love with a lady of the Traversari family, sbendth his substance without being beloved in return, and betaking himself, at the instance of his kinsfolk, to chissi. He there seth a horseman give chase to a damsel and slay her, and cause her be devoured of two dogs. Therewithal he biddeth his kinsfolk, and the lady whom he loveth to a dinner, where his mistress seth the same damsel, torn in pices, and fearing a like fate, taketh Nastajo to husband. No sooner was Loretta silent than Philomna, by the queen's commandment, began thus: Lovesome ladies, even as pity is in us commended, so also is cruelty rigorously avenged by divine justice, the which that I may prove to you, and so engage you altogether to purge yourselves therefrom, it pleaseth me tell you a story no less pitiful than delectable. In Ravenna, a very ancient city of Romagna, there were aforetime many noblemen and gentlemen, and amongst the rest a young man called Nastajo Digliwunsti, who had, by the death of his father and an uncle of his, been left rich beyond all estimation, and who, as it happeneth often with young men, being without a wife, fell in love with a daughter of Messer Paolo Traversari, a young lady of much greater family than his own, hoping by his fashions to bring her to love him in return. But these, though great and goodly and commendable, not only profited him nothing, nay, it seemed they did him harm. So cruel and obdurate and intractable did the beloved damsel show herself to him, being grown belike, whether for her singular beauty or the nobility of her birth, so proud and disdainful that neither he nor aught that pleased him pleased her. This was so grievous to Nastajo to bear that many a time, for chagrin, being weary of complaining, he had it in his thought to kill himself, but held his hand therefrom. And again he took it to heart to let her be altogether or have her, and he might, in hatred, even as she had him. But in vain did he take such a resolve, for that, the more hope failed him, the more it seemed his love redoubled. Accordingly, he persisted both in loving and in spending without stint or measure, till it seemed to certain of his friends and kinsfolk that he was like to consume both himself and his substance. Wherefore they besought him again, and counselled him depart Ravenna and go sojourn a while in some other place. For that, so doing, he would abate both his passion and his expenditure. Nastajo long made light of this counsel, but at last, being importuned of them and able no longer to say no, he promised to do as they would have him and let make great preparations, as he would go into France or Spain or some other far place. Then, taking horse in company with many of his friends, he rode out of Ravenna and betook himself to a place called Chiasi, some 3 miles from the city, where, sending for tents and pavilions, he told those who had accompanied him thither that he meant to abide, and that they might return to Ravenna. Accordingly, having encamped there, he proceeded to lead the goodliest and most magnificent life that was inviting now these, now those others, to supper and to dinner, as he was used. It chanced one day, he being come thus well nigh to the beginning of May, and the weather being very fair, that, having entered into thought of his cruel mistress, he bade all his servants leave him to himself, so he might muse more at his leisure, and wandered on, step by step, lost in melancholy thought, till he came into the pine wood. The 5th hour of the day was well nigh past, and he had gone a good half-mile into the wood, remembering him neither of eating nor of aught else, when him seemed of a sudden he heard a terrible great wailing and loud cries uttered by a woman. Whereupon, his dulcet meditation being broken, he raised his head to see what was to do, and marveled to find himself among the pines. Then, looking before him, he saw a very fair damsel come running, naked through a thicket all thronged with underwood and briars, towards the place where he was, weeping and crying sore for mercy, and all dishevelled and torn by the bushes and the brambles. At her heels ran 2 huge and fierce mastiffs, which followed hard upon her and oft-times bit her cruelly, weenas they overtook her. And after them he saw come riding upon a black courser a knight arrayed in sad-coloured armour, with a very wrathful aspect and a tuck in his hand, threatening her with death in foul and fearsome words. This sight filled Nasty Joe's mind at once with terror and amazement, and after stirred him to compassion of the ill-fortuned lady, wherefrom arose a desire to deliver her, and but he might, from such anguish and death. Finding himself without arms, he ran to take the branch of a tree for a club, armed wherewith. He advanced to meet the dogs and the knight. When the latter saw this, he cried out to him from afar off, saying, "Nasty Joe, meddle not. Suffer the dogs and myself to do that which this wicked woman hath merited." As he spoke, the dogs, laying fast hold of the damsel by the flanks, brought her to a stand, and the knight, coming up, lighted down from his horse, whereupon Nasty Joe drew near unto him and said, "I know not who thou mayst be, that knowest me so well. But this much I say to see that it is a great felony for an armed knight to seek to slay a naked woman and to set the dogs on her, as she were a wild beast. Certes, I will defend her as most I may." "Nasty Joe," answered the knight, "I was of one same city with thyself, and thou wast yet a little child when I, who hight Messer Guido digli Anastagi, was yet more passionately enamoured of this woman than thou art presently of yonder, one of the Traversari, and my ill fortune for her hard-heartedness and barbarity came to such a pass that one day I slew myself in despair with this tuck thou seest in my hand, and was doomed to eternal punishment. Nor was it long ere she, who was beyond measure rejoiced at my death, died also, and for the sin of her cruelty, and of the delight had of her in my torments, whereof she repented her not, as one who thought not to have sinned therein, but rather to have merited reward, was and is on like wise condemned to the pains of hell. Wherein no sooner was she descended than it was decreed unto her and to me, for penance thereof, that she should flee before me, and that I, who once loved her so dear, should pursue her, not as a beloved mistress, but as a mortal enemy. And that as often as I overtook her, I should slay her with this tuck, wherewith I slew myself, and ripping open her loins, tear from her body, as thou shalt presently see, that hard and cold heart, wherein nor love nor pity might ever avail to enter, together with the other entrails, and give them to the dogs to eat. Nor is it a great while after ere, as God's justice and puissance will it, she riseth up again, as she had not been dead, and beginneth anew her woeful flight, whilst the dogs and I again pursue her. And every Friday it betideth that I come up with her here at this hour, and wreak on her the slaughter that thou shalt see, and think not that we rest the other days. Nay, I overtake her in other places, wherein she thought and wrought cruelly against me. Thus, being as thou seest, from her lover grown her foe, it behoveth me pursue her on this wise as many years as she was cruel to me months. Wherefore leave me to carry the justice of God into effect, and seek not to oppose that which thou mayst not avail to hinder." Nasty Joe, hearing these words, drew back, grown all adread, with not an hair on his body but stood on end, and looking upon the wretched damsel, began fearfully to await that which the knight should do. The latter, having made an end of his discourse, ran, tuck in hand, as he were a ravening dog, at the damsel, who, fallen on her knees and held fast by the 2 mastiffs, cried him mercy, and smiting her with all his might amiddleward the breast, pierced her through and through. No sooner had she received this stroke than she fell grovelling on the ground, still weeping and crying out, Whereupon the knight, clapping his hand to his hunting knife, ripped open her loins and tearing forth her heart and all that was thereabout, cast them to the two mastiffs, who devoured them incontinent, as being sore anhungred. Nor was it long ere, as if none of these things had been, the damsel of a sudden rose to her feet and began to flee towards the sea, with the dogs after her, still rending her. And in a little while they had gone so for that Nastajo could see them no more. The latter, seeing these things, abode a great while between pity and fear, and presently it occurred to his mind that this might much avail him, seeing that it befell every Friday. Wherefore, marking the place, he returned to his servants, and after, ween as it seemed to him fit, he sent for sundry of his kinsmen and friends, and said to them, You have long urged me leave loving this mine enemy and put an end to my expenditure, and I am ready to do it, provided you will obtain me a favor. The which is this, that on the coming Friday you make shift to have Messer Paolo Traversari and his wife and daughter, and all their kinswomen, and what other ladies soever, it shall please you here to dinner with me. That for which I wish this, you shall see then. This seemed to them a little thing enough to do, wherefore, returning to Ravenna, they in due time invited those whom Nastajo would have to dine with him, and albeit it was no easy matter to bring thither the young lady whom he loved, nathless she went with the other ladies. Meanwhile, Nastajo let make ready a magnificent banquet, and caused set the tables under the pines round, about the place where he had witnessed the slaughter of the cruel lady. The time come, he seated the gentlemen and the ladies at table, and so ordered it that his mistress should be placed right over against the spot where the thing should befall. Accordingly, hardly was the last dish come when the despairful outcry of the hunted damsel began to be heard of all, whereat each of the company marveled and inquired what was to do, but none could say. Whereupon all started to their feet, and looking what this might be, they saw the woeful damsel and the knight and the dogs, nor was it long ere they were all there among them. Great was the clamor against both dogs and knight, and many rushed forward to succor the damsel. But the knight, bespeaking them as he had bespoken Nastajo, not only made them draw back, but filled them all with terror and amazement. Then did he as he had done before, whereat all the ladies that were there, and there were many present who had been kinswomen both to the woeful damsel and to the knight, and who remembered them both of his love and of his death, wept as piteously as if they had seen this done to themselves. The thing carried to its end, and the damsel and the knight gone, the adventure set those who had seen it upon many and various discourses. But of those who were the most affrighted was the cruel damsel beloved of Nastajo, who had distinctly seen and heard the whole matter, and understood that these things concerned her more than any other who was there, remembering her of the cruelty she had still used towards Nastajo. Wherefore her seemed, she fled already before her enraged lover, and had the mastiffs at her heels. Such was the terror awakened in her thereby, that so this might not betide her no sooner did she find an opportunity, which was afforded her that same evening, then turning her hatred into love, she dispatched to Nastajo a trusty chamberwoman of hers, who besought him that it should please him to go to her, for that she was ready to do all that should be his pleasure. He answered that this was exceeding agreeable to him, but that, so it pleased her, he desired to have his pleasure of her with honor, to wit, by taking her to wife. The damsel, who knew that it rested with none other than herself that she had not been his wife, made answer to him that it liked her well. Then, playing the messenger herself, she told her father and mother that she was content to be Nastajo's wife, whereat they were mightily rejoiced, and he, espousing her on the ensuing Sunday and celebrating his nuptials, lived with her long and happily. Nor was this affright the cause of that good only. Nay, all the ladies of Ravenna became so fearful by reason thereof, that ever after they were much more amenable than they had before been to the desires of the men. The ninth story. Epidemic, albrghi lovth, and is not loved. He wasteth his substance in prodigal hospitality, till there is left him but one sole falcon, which, having naught else, he giveth his mistress to eat, on her coming to his house. And she, learning this, changth her mind and taking him to husband, maketh him rich again. Philomena having ceased speaking, the queen, seeing that none remained to tell save only herself and Dionio, whose privilege entitled him to speak last, said with blithe aspect, It pertaineth now to me to tell, and I, dearest ladies, will willingly do it, relating a story like in part to the foregoing, to the intent that not only may you know how much the love of you can avail in gentle hearts, but that you may learn to be yourselves, ween as it behoveth, bestowers of your guerdons, without always suffering fortune to be your guide, which most times, as it chanceth, giveth not discreetly, but out of all measure. You must know, then, that Capo di Borghi's Domnici, who was of our days and maybe is yet a man of great worship and authority in our city and illustrious and worthy of eternal renown, much more for his fashions and his merit than for the nobility of his blood, being grown full of years, delighted oftentimes to discourse with his neighbors and others of things past, the which he knew how to do better and more orderly, and with more memory and elegance of speech than any other man. Amongst other fine things of his, he was used to tell that there was once in Florence a young man called Federigo, son of Messer Filippo Alberighi, and renowned for deeds of arms and courtesy over every other bachelor in Tuscany, who, as betideth most gentlemen, became enamored of a gentlewoman named Madame Giovanna, in her day held one of the fairest and sprightliest ladies that were in Florence. And to win her love, he held jousts and tourneyings and made entertainments and gave gifts and spent his substance without any stint. But she, being no less virtuous than fair, recked not of these things done for her nor of him who did them. Federigo spending thus far beyond his means and gaining naught, his wealth, as lightly happineth, in course of time came to an end and he abode poor, nor was aught left him but a poor little farm, on whose returns he lived very meagerly, and to boot a falcon he had, one of the best in the world. Wherefore, being more in love than ever and him seeming he might no longer make such a figure in the city as he would fain do, he took up his abode at Campi, where his farm was, and there bore his poverty with patience, hawking ween as he might, and asking of no one. Federigo being thus come to extremity, it befell one day that Madame Giovanna's husband fell sick, and seeing himself nigh upon death, made his will, wherein, being very rich, he left a son of his, now well grown, his heir, after which, having much loved Madame Giovanna, he substituted her to his heir, in case his son should die without lawful issue, and died. Madame Giovanna, being thus left a widow, betook herself that summer, as is the usance of our ladies, into the country with her son to an estate of hers very near that of Federigo. Wherefore it befell that the lad made acquaintance with the latter and began to take delight in hawks and hounds, and having many a time seen his falcon flown and being strangely taken therewith, longed sore to have it, but dared not ask it of him, seeing it so dear to him. The thing standing thus, it came to pass that the lad fell sick, whereat his mother was sore concerned, as one who had none but him and loved him with all her might, and abode about him all day, comforting him without cease. And many a time she asked him if there were aught he desired, beseeching him tell it her, for an it might be gotten, she would contrive that he should have it. The lad, having heard these offers many times repeated, said, "Mother mine, and you could procure me to have Federigo's falcon, methinketh I should soon be whole." The lady hearing this, bethought herself a while, and began to consider how she should do. She knew that Federigo had long loved her, and had never gotten of her so much as a glance of the eye. Wherefore quoth she in herself, "How shall I send or go to him to seek of him this falcon, which is, by all I hear, the best that ever flew and which, to boot, maintaineth him in the world? And how can I be so graceless as to offer to take this from a gentleman who hath none other pleasure left?" Perplexed with this thought, and knowing not what to say, for all she was very certain of getting the bird, if she asked for it, she made no reply to her son, but abode silent. However, at last, the love of her son so got the better of her that she resolved in herself to satisfy him, come what might, and not to send, but to go herself for the falcon and fetch it to him. Accordingly she said to him, "My son, take comfort and bethink thyself to grow well again, for I promise thee that the first thing I do tomorrow morning I will go for it and fetch it to thee." The boy was rejoiced at this, and showed some amendment that same day. Next morning, the lady, taking another lady to bear her company, repaired, by way of diversion, to Federigo's little house and inquired for the latter, who, for that it was no weather for hawking nor had been for some days past, was then in a garden he had, overlooking the doing of certain little matters of his, and hearing that Madame Giovanna asked for him at the door, ran thither, rejoicing and marveling exceedingly. She, seeing him come, rose and going with womanly graciousness to meet him, answered his respectful salutation with "Give you good day, Federigo." Then went on to say, "I am come to make thee amends for that which thou hast suffered through me, in loving me more than should have behooved thee. And the amends in question is this, that I purpose to dine with thee this morning familiarly, I and this lady my companion." "Madam," answered Federigo humbly, "I remember me not to have ever received any ill at your hands, but on the contrary so much good that, if ever I was worth aught, it came about through your worth and the love I bore you. And assuredly, albeit you have come to a poor host, this your gracious visit is far more precious to me than it would be an it were given me to spend over again as much as that which I have spent aforetime." So saying, he shamefastly received her into his house and thence brought her into his garden, where, having none else to bear her company, he said to her, "Madam, since there is none else here, this good woman, wife of yonder husbandman, will bear you company, whilst I go see the table laid." Never till that moment, extreme as was his poverty, had he been so dolorously sensible of the straits to which he had brought himself for the lack of those riches he had spent on such disorderly wise. But that morning, finding he had nothing wherewithal he might honorably entertain the lady, for love of whom he had aforetime entertained folk without number, he was made perforce aware of his default and ran hither and thither, perplexed beyond measure, like a man beside himself, inwardly cursing his ill fortune, but found neither money nor aught he might pawn. It was now growing late, and he having a great desire to entertain the gentle lady with somewhat, yet choosing not to have recourse to his own laborer, much less anyone else, his eye fell on his good falcon, which he saw on his perch in his little saloon. Whereupon, having no other resource, he took the bird and finding him fat, deemed him a dish worthy of such a lady. Accordingly, without more ado, he wrung the hawk's neck, and hastily caused a little maid of his pluck it, and truss it, and after put it on the spit, and roast it diligently. Then, the table laid and covered with very white cloths, whereof he had yet some store, he returned with a blithe countenance to the lady in the garden, and told her that dinner was ready, such as it was in his power to provide. Accordingly, the lady and her friend, arising, betook themselves to table and in company with Federigo, who served them with the utmost diligence, ate the good falcon, unknowing what they did. Presently, after they had risen from table and had abidden with him a while in cheerful discourse, the lady, thinking it time to tell that wherefore she was come, turned to Federigo and courteously bespoke him, saying, "Federigo, I doubt not a jot but that, when thou hearest that which is the especial occasion of my coming hither, thou wilt marvel at my presumption, remembering thee of thy past life and of my virtue, which latter belike thou reputedst cruelty and hardness of heart. But if thou hadst or hadst had children, by whom thou mightest know how potent is the love one beareth them, meseemeth certain that thou wouldst in part hold me excused. But although thou hast none, I who have one child cannot therefore escape the common laws to which other mothers are subject, and whose enforcements it behoveth me ensue, need must I, against my will and contrary to all right and seemliness, ask of thee a boon, which I know is supremely dear to thee. And that with good reason, for that thy sorry fortune hath left thee none other delight, none other diversion, none other solace, to wit, thy falcon, whereof my boy is so sore enamored that. And I carry it not to him, I fear me his present disorder will be so aggravated that there may presently ensue thereof somewhat whereby I shall lose him. Wherefore I conjure thee not by the love thou bearest me and whereto thou art noise beholden, but by thine own nobility, which in doing courtesy hath approved itself greater than in any other that it pleased thee give it to me. So by the gift I may say I have kept my son alive, and thus made him for ever thy debtor." Federigo, hearing what the lady asked, and knowing that he could not oblige her, for that he had given her the falcon to eat, fell a-weeping in her presence, ere he could answer a word. The lady at first believed that his tears arose from grief at having to part from his good falcon, and was like to say that she would not have it. However, she contained herself and awaited what Federigo should reply, who, after weeping a while, made answer thus: "Madam, since it pleased God that I should set my love on you, I have in many things reputed fortune contrary to me, and have complained of her. But all the ill turns she hath done me have been a light matter in comparison with that which she doth me at this present, and for which I can never more be reconciled to her, considering that you are come hither to my poor house, whereas you deign not to come what while I was rich, and seek of me a little boon, the which she hath so wrought that I cannot grant you. And why this cannot be I will tell you briefly. When I heard that you, of your favor, were minded to dine with me, I deemed it a light thing and a seemly, having regard to your worth and the nobility of your station, to honor you, as far as in me lay, with some choicer victual than that which is commonly set before other folk. Wherefore, remembering me of the falcon which you ask of me, and of his excellence, I judged him a dish worthy of you. This very morning, then, you have had him roasted upon the trencher, and indeed I had accounted him excellently well bestowed. But now, seeing that you would fain have had him on otherwise, it is so great a grief to me that I cannot oblige you therein that methinketh I shall never forgive myself therefore. So saying, in witness of this, he let cast before her the falcon's feathers and feet and beak. The lady, seeing and hearing this, first blamed him for having, to give a woman to eat, slain such a falcon, and after inwardly much commended the greatness of his soul, which poverty had not availed nor might anywise avail to abate. Then, being put out of all hope of having the falcon and fallen therefore in doubt of her son's recovery, she took her leave and returned, all disconsolate, to the latter, who, before many days had passed, whether for chagrin that he could not have the bird, or for that his disorder was e'en fated to bring him to that pass, departed this life, to the inexpressible grief of his mother. After she had abidden a while full of tears and affliction, being left very rich and yet young, she was more than once urged by her brothers to marry again, and albeit she would fain not have done so, yet, finding herself importuned and calling to mind Federigo's worth and his last magnificence, to wit, the having slain such a falcon for her entertainment, she said to them, I would gladly, an it liked you, abide as I am. But since it is your pleasure that I take a husband, certes I will never take any other, and I have not Federigo digli alberighi. Whereupon her brothers, making mock of her, said, Silly woman that thou art, what is this thou sayest? How canst thou choose him, seeing he hath nothing in the world? Brothers mine, answered she, I know very well that it is as you say, but I would liefer have a man that lacketh of riches than riches that lack of a man. Her brethren, hearing her mind and knowing Federigo for a man of great merit, poor though he was, gave her, with all her wealth to him, even as she would. And he, seeing himself married to a lady of such worth, and one whom he had loved so dear and exceeding rich to boot, became a better husband of his substance, and ended his days with her in joy and solace. The 10th story. Pietro 501 Vincio goeth to sup abroad, whereupon his wife letteth fetch her a youth to keep her company, and her husband returning, unlooked for, shehidether gallant under a hen coop. Pietro telleth her how there had been found in the house of one Arcolano, with whom he was to have supped, a young man brought in by his wife, and blameth the latter. Presently, an ass, by mischance, setth foot on the fingers of him who is under the coop, and he roareth out. Whereupon Pietro runneth thither and espying him, discovereth his wife's unfaith, but ultimately cometh to an accord with her for his own lewd ends. The queen's story come to an end, and all having praised God for that he had rewarded Federigo according to his desert, Dionio, who never waited for commandment, began on this wise. I know not whether to say if it be a casual vice, grown up in mankind through perversity of manners and usances, or a defect inherent in our nature, that we laugh rather at things ill than at good works, especially when they concern us not. Wherefore, seeing that the pains I have otherwhiles taken, and am now about to take aim at none other end than to rid you of melancholy, and afford you occasion for laughter and merriment, albeit the matter of my present story may be in part not altogether seemly, nevertheless, lovesome lasses, for that it may afford diversion, I will e'en tell it you. And do you, hearkening thereunto, as you are wont to do, ween as you enter into gardens, where, putting out your dainty hands, you cull the roses and leave the thorns be. On this wise must you do with my story, leaving the naughty man of whom I shall tell you to his infamy and ill luck go with him, what while you laugh merrily at the amorous devices of his wife, having compassion, weena's need is, of the mischances of others. There was then in Perugia, no great while Agon, a rich man called Pietro di Vinciolo, who, belike more to beguile others and to abate the general suspect in which he was had of all the Perugians, than for any desire of his own, took him a wife. And fortune in this was so far conformable to his inclination that the wife he took was a thick-set, red-haired, hot-complexioned wench, who would liefer have had 2 husbands than one. Whereas she happened upon one, who had a mind far more disposed to otherwhat than to her. Becoming, in process of time, aware of this, and seeing herself fair and fresh, and feeling herself buxom and lusty, she began by being sore incensed thereat, and came once and again to unseemly words thereof with her husband, with whom she was well nigh always at variance. Then, seeing that this might result rather in her own exhaustion than in the amendment of her husband's depravity, she said in herself, "Yonder caitiff forsaketh me to go of his ribaldries on pattens through the dry, and I will study to carry others on shipboard through the wet." I took him to husband and brought him a fine great dowry, knowing him to be a man and supposing him desireful of that whereunto men are and should be fain, and had I not believed that he would play the part of a man, I had never taken him. He knew that I was a woman. Why, then, did he take me to wife, if women were not to his mind? This is not to be suffered. Were I minded to renounce the world, I should have made myself a nun. But if, choosing to live in the world, as I do, I look for delight or pleasure from yonder fellow, I may belike grow old, expecting in vain, and weenas I shall be old, I shall in vain repent and bemoan myself of having wasted my youth, which latter he himself is a very good teacher and demonstrator how I should solace, showing me by example how I should delect myself with that wherein he delighteth, more by token that this were commendable in me, whereas in him it is exceeding blameworthy. Seeing that I should offend against the laws alone, whereas he offendeth against both law and nature. Accordingly, the good lady, having thus bethought herself and belike more than once, to give effect privily to these considerations, clapped up an acquaintance with an old woman who showed, like Saint Verdiana, that giveth the serpents to eat, and still went to every pardoning, beads in hand, nor ever talked of aught but the lives of the holy fathers or of the wounds of Saint Francis, and was of well nigh all reputed a saint. And weenas it seemed to her time, frankly discovered to her intent. "Daughter mine," replied the beldam, "God who knoweth all knoweth that thou wilt do exceeding well, and if for naught else yet shouldst thou do it, thou and every other young woman, not to lose the time of your youth, for that to whoso hath understanding, there is no grief like that of having lost one's time. And what a devil are we women good for, once we are old, save to keep the ashes about the firepot? If none else knoweth it and can bear witness thereof, that do and can I, for now that I am old, I recognize without avail, but not without very sore and bitter remorse of mind, the time that I let slip, and albeit I lost it not altogether, for that I would not have thee deem me a ninny, still I did not what I might have done. Whereof weenas I remember me, seeing myself fashioned as thou seest me at this present, so that thou wouldst find none to give me fire to my tinder, God knoweth what chagrin I feel. With men it is not so. They are born apt for 1,000 things, not for this alone, and most part of them are of much more account old than young. But women are born into the world for nothing but to do this and bear children, and it is for this that they are prized. The which, if from naught else, thou mayst apprehend from this, that we women are still ready for the sport. More by token that one woman would tire out many men at the game, whereas many men cannot tire one woman. And for that we are born unto this, I tell thee again that thou wilt do exceeding well to return thy husband a loaf for his bannock, so thy soul may have no cause to reproach thy flesh in thine old age. Each one hath of this world just so much as he taketh to himself thereof, and especially is this the case with women, whom it behoveth, much more than men, make use of their time whilst they have it. For thou mayst see how, when we grow old, nor husband nor other will look at us. Nay, they send us off to the kitchen to tell tales to the cat and count the pots and pans, and what is worse, they tag rhymes on us and say, "Tidbits for wenches young, gags for the old wife's tongue." Footnote 286. I.e., she was grown so repulsively ugly in her old age, that no one cared to do her even so trifling a service as giving her a spark in tinder to light her fire withal. And many another thing to the like purpose. And that I may hold thee no longer in parley, I tell thee in fine that thou couldst not have discovered thy mind to anyone in the world who can be more useful to thee than I. For that there is no man so high and mighty, but I dare tell him what behoveth, nor any so dour or churlish, but I know how to supple him aright and bring him to what I will. Wherefore do thou but show me who pleaseth thee, and after leave me do. But one thing I commend to thee, daughter mine, and that is, that thou be mindful of me, for that I am a poor body, and would have thee henceforth a sharer in all my pardonings, and in all the paternosters I shall say, so God may make them light and candles for thy dead. Footnote 288, i.e. that they may serve to purchase remission from purgatory for the souls of her dead relatives, instead of the burning of candles and tapers, which is held by the Roman Catholic Church to have that effect. With this she made an end of her discourse, and the young lady came to an understanding with her that, weenas she chanced to spy a certain young spark who passed often through that quarter, and whose every feature she set out to her, she should know what she had to do. Then, giving her a piece of salt meat, she dismissed her with God's blessing. Nor had many days passed ere the old woman brought her him of whom she had bespoken her privily into her chamber, and a little while after, another and another, according as they chanced to take the lady's fancy, who stinted not to indulge herself in this as often as occasion offered, though still fearful of her husband. It chanced one evening that, her husband being to sup abroad with a friend of his, Ercolano by name, she charged the old woman bring her a youth, who was one of the goodliest and most agreeable of all Perugia, which she promptly did. But hardly had the lady seated herself at table to sup with her gallant, when behold, Pietro called out at the door to have it opened to him. She, hearing this, gave herself up for lost, but yet desiring, and she might, to conceal the youth, and not having the presence of mind to send him away or hide him elsewhere, made him take refuge under a hen-coop that was in a shed adjoining the chamber where they were at supper, and cast over him the sacking of a pallet bed that she had that day let empty. This done, she made haste to open to her husband, to whom quoth she, as soon as he entered the house, "You have very soon dispatched this supper of yours." "We have not so much as tasted it," replied he, and she said, "How was that?" Quoth he, "I will tell thee. Scarce were we seated at table, Ercolano and his wife and I, when we heard some one sneeze hard by, whereof we took no note the first time nor the second. But he who sneezed sneezing yet a third time and a fourth and a fifth and many other times, it made us all marvel. Whereupon Ercolano, who was somewhat vexed with his wife for that she had kept us a great while standing at the door, without opening to us, said, as if in a rage, "What meaneth this? Who is it sneezeth thus?" And rising from table, made for a stair that stood near at hand, and under which, hard by the stair-foot, was a closure of planks, wherein to bestow all manner things, as we see those do every day who set their houses in order. Him seeming it was from this that came the noise of sneezing, he opened a little door that was therein, and no sooner had he done this than there issued forth thereof the frightfulest stench of sulphur that might be. Somewhat of this smell had already reached us, and we complaining thereof, the lady had said, "It is because I was but now in act to bleach my veils with sulphur and after set the pan, over which I had spread them to catch the fumes, under the stair, so that it yet smoketh thereof." As soon as the smoke was somewhat spent, Ercolano looked into the cupboard, and there espied him who had sneezed and who was yet in act to sneeze, for that the fumes of the sulphur constrained him thereto, and indeed they had by this time so straitened his breast that, had he abidden a while longer, he had never sneezed nor done aught else again. Ercolano, seeing him, cried out, "Now, wife, I see why, ween as we came hither a while ago, we were kept so long at the door without its being opened to us. But may I never again have aught that shall please me, and I pay thee not for this." The lady, hearing this and seeing that her sin was discovered, stayed not to make any excuse, but started up from table and made off I know not whither. Ercolano, without remarking his wife's flight, again and again bade him who sneezed come forth, but the latter, who was now at the last gasp, offered not to stir, for all that he could say. Whereupon, taking him by one foot, he haled him forth of his hiding place and ran for a knife to kill him. But I, fearing the police on mine own account, arose and suffered him not to slay him or do him any hurt. Nay, crying out and defending him, I gave the alarm to certain of the neighbors, who ran thither and taking the now half-dead youth, carried him forth the house I know not whither. Wherefore, our supper being disturbed by these things, I have not only not dispatched it, nay, I have, as I said, not even tasted it. The lady, hearing this, knew that there were other women as wise as herself, albeit ill-hap by times betided some of them thereof, and would fain have defended Ercolano's wife with words. But her seeming that, by blaming others' defaults, she might make freer way for her own, she began to say, "Here be fine doings." A holy and virtuous lady indeed she must be. She to whom, as I am an honest woman, I would have confessed myself, so spiritually minded meseemed she was. And the worst of it is that she, being presently an old woman, setteth a mighty fine example to the young. Accursed by the hour she came into the world, and she also, who suffereth herself to live, perfidious and vile woman that she must be, the general reproach and shame of all the ladies of the city, who, casting to the winds her honor and the faith plighted to her husband and the world's esteem, is not ashamed to dishonor him, and herself with him, for another man, him who is such a man and so worshipful a citizen, and who used her so well. So God save me, there should be no mercy had of such women as she. They should be put to death. They should be cast alive into the fire and burned to ashes. Then, bethinking her of her gallant, whom she had hard by under the coop, she began to exhort Pietro to betake himself to bed, for that it was time. But he, having more mind to eat than to sleep, enquired if there was aught for supper. "Supper, quotha," answered the lady. "Truly, we are much used to get supper, weenas thou art abroad." "A fine thing indeed. Dost thou take me for Ercolano's wife? Alack, why dost thou not go to sleep for tonight? How far better thou wilt do." Now it chanced that, certain husbandmen of Pietro's being come that evening with sundry matters from the farm, and having put up their asses, without watering them, in a little stable adjoining the shed, one of the latter, being sore athirst, slipped his head out of the halter and making his way out of the stable, went smelling to everything, so haply he might find some water, and going thus, he came presently full on the hen coop, under which was the young man. The latter having, for that it behoved him abide on all fours, put out the fingers of one hand on the ground beyond the coop, such was his luck, or rather let us say, his ill luck, that the ass set his hoof on them, whereupon the youth, feeling an exceeding great pain, set up a terrible outcry. Pietro, hearing this, marveled and perceived that the noise came from within the house, wherefore he went out into the shed, and hearing the others still clamoring, for that the ass had not lifted up his hoof from his fingers, but still trod hard upon them, said, "Who is there?" Then, running to the hen coop, he raised it and espied the young man, who, beside the pain he suffered from his fingers that were crushed by the ass's hoof, was all trembling for fear lest Pietro should do him a mischief. The latter, knowing him for one whom he had long pursued for his lewd ends, asked him what he did there, whereto he answered him nothing, but prayed him for the love of God do him no harm. Quoth Pietro, "Arise and fear not that I will do thee any hurt, but tell me how thou comest here, and for what purpose." The youth told him all, whereupon Pietro, no less rejoiced to have found him than his wife was woeful taking him by the hand, carried him into the chamber, where the lady awaited him with the greatest affright in the world, and seating himself over against her, said, "But now thou cursedst Ercolano's wife, and avouchedst that she should be burnt, and that she was the disgrace of all you women. Why didst thou not speak of thyself? Or, and thou choosedst not to speak of thyself, how could thy conscience suffer thee to speak thus of her, knowing thyself to have done even as did she? Certes, none other thing moved thee thereunto save that you women are all made thus, and look to cover your own doings with others' defaults. Would fire might come from heaven to burn you all up, perverse generation that you are." The lady, seeing that, in the first heat of the discovery, he had done her no harm other than in words and her seeming, she saw that he was all agog with joy for that he held so goodly a stripling by the hand, took heart, and said, "Of this much, indeed, I am mighty well assured, that thou wouldst have fire come from heaven to burn us women all up, being, as thou art, as fain to us as a dog to cudgels. But by Christ his cross, thou shalt not get thy wish. However, I would fain have a little discourse with thee, so I may know of what thou complainest. Certes, it were a fine thing an thou shouldst seek to even me with Ercolano's wife, who is a beat-breast, a smell-sin, and hath of her husband what she will, and is of him held dear as a wife should be, the which is not the case with me. For, grant that I am well clad and shod of thee, thou knowest but too well how I fare for the rest, and how long it is since thou hast lain with me. And I had liefer go barefoot, and rags to my back, and be well used of thee abed than have all these things, being used as I am of thee. For understand plainly, Pietro, I am a woman like other women, and have a mind unto that which other women desire. So that, and I procure me thereof, not having it from thee, thou hast no call to missay of me therefore. At the least, I do thee this much honor, that I have not to do with horseboys and scaldheads. Footnote 289, i.e. a hypocritical sham devotee, covering a lewd life with an appearance of sanctity. Pietro perceived that words were not like to fail her for all that night. Wherefore, as one who recked little of her, "Wife," said he, "no more for the present, I will content thee aright of this matter, but thou wilt do us a great courtesy to let us have somewhat to sup withal, for that meseemeth this lad, like myself, hath not yet supped." "Certes, no," answered the lady, "he hath not yet supped, for we were sitting down to table when thou camest in thine ill hour." "Go then," rejoined Pietro, "contrive that we may sup, and after I will order this matter on such wise that thou shalt have no cause to complain." The lady, finding that her husband was satisfied, arose and caused straightway reset the table. Then, letting bring the supper she had prepared, she supped merrily in company with her caitiff of a husband and the young man. After supper, what Pietro devised for the satisfaction of all three hath escaped my mind. But this much I know, that on the following morning the youth was escorted back to the public place, not altogether certain which he had the more been that night, wife or husband. Wherefore, dear my ladies, this will I say to you: whoso doth it to you, do you it to him. And if you cannot presently, keep it in mind till such time as you can, so he may get as good as he giveth. Dionio, having made an end of his story, which had been less laughed at by the ladies, more for shamefastness than for the little delight they took therein, the queen, seeing the end of her sovereignty come, rose to her feet, and putting off the laurel crown, set it blithely on Alyssa's head, saying, "With you, madam, henceforth it resteth to command." Alyssa, accepting the honor, did even as it had been done before her, in that, having first, to the satisfaction of the company, taken order with the seneschal for that whereof there was need for the time of her governance, she said, "We have many a time heard how, by dint of smart sayings and ready repartees and prompt advisements, many have availed with an apt retort to take the edge off other folks' teeth, or to fend off imminent perils. And for that the matter is goodly and may be useful, I will that tomorrow, with God's aid, it be discoursed within these terms, to wit, of whoso, being assailed with some gibing speech, hath vindicated himself or hath, with some ready reply or advisement, escaped loss, peril, or shame. Footnote 290, lit. A due or deserved bite, debito morso. I mention this to show the connection with teeth. Footnote 291. An ellipsis of a kind common in Boccaccio, and indeed in all the old Italian writers, meaning, it may be useful to enlarge upon the subject in question. This was much commended of all, whereupon the queen, rising to her feet, dismissed them all until supper time. The honorable company, seeing her risen, stood up all and each, according to the wonted fashion, applied himself to that which was most agreeable to him. But the crickets having now given over singing, the queen let call everyone, and they betook themselves to supper, which being dispatched with merry cheer, they all gave themselves to singing and making music. And Emilia having, at the queen's commandment, set up a dance, Dionio was bidden sing a song, whereupon he straightway struck up with Mistress Aldruda, "Come lift up your fudde, for I bring you, good tidings." Whereat all the ladies fell a-laughing, and especially the queen, who bade him leave that and sing another. Quoth Dionio, "Madam, had I a tabret, I would sing, 'Come truss your coats, I prithee, Mistress Burdock,' or 'Under the olive the grass is,' or will you have me say, 'The waves of the sea do great evil to me'? But I have no tabret, so look which you will of these others. Will it please you have come forth unto us, so it may be cut down like a may in the midst of the meadows?" "Nay," answered the queen, "give us another." "Then," said Dionio, "shall I sing, 'Mistress Simona, embarrel, embarrel'?" "It is not the month of October?" Quoth the queen, laughing, "Ill luck to thee, sing us a goodly one, and thou wilt, for we will none of these." "Nay, madam," rejoined Dionio, "fash not yourself, but which then like you better?" "I know more than 1,000. Will you have 'This my shell and I prick it not well,' or 'Fair and softly, husband mine,' or 'I'll buy me a cock of 100 pounds sterling'?" Therewithal the queen, somewhat provoked, though all the other ladies laughed, said, "Dionio, leave jesting and sing us a goodly one, else shalt thou prove how I can be angry." Hearing this, he gave over his quips and cranks and forthright fell a-singing after this fashion. Footnote 292. The songs proposed by Dioneo are all apparently of a light, if not a wanton, character, and not fit to be sung before ladies. O love, the amorous light that beameth from yon fair one's lovely eyes, hath made me thine, and hers in servant guise. The splendor of her lovely eyes, it wrought that first thy flames were kindled in my breast, passing thereto through mine, yea, and thy virtue first unto my thought her visage fair it was made manifest, which picturing, I twine and lay before her shrine all virtues, that to her I sacrifice, become the new occasion of my sighs. Thus, dear my lord, thy vassal am I grown, and of thy might obediently await grace for my lowliness. Yet wot I not if wholly there be known the high desire that in my breast thou's t set, and my sheer faith, no less, of her who doth possess my heart, so that from none beneath the skies, save her alone, peace would I take or prize. Wherefore I pray thee, sweet my lord and sire, discover it to her, and cause her taste some scantling of thy heat to me ward. For thou seest that in the fire, loving, I languish, and for torment waste by inches at her feet. And eke in season meet commend me to her favor on such wise as I would plead for thee, should need arise. Footnote 293. This singularly naive give-and-take fashion of asking a favor of a god recalls the old Scotch epitaph cited by Mr. George MacDonald. Here lie I Martin Elginbrod. He mercy a my soul, Lord God, as I wad do, were I Lord God and ye were Martin Elginbrod. Dioneo, by his silence, showing that his song was ended, the queen let sing many others, having nathless much commended his. Then, some dull of the night being spent, and the queen feeling the heat of the day to be now overcome of the coolness of the night, she bade each at his pleasure betake himself to rest against the ensuing day. Here Eandth, the 5th day of the Decameron,